Volume 1, Book 2, Chapters 12 through 21 of the Life of Apollonius of Tyana. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Apollonius of Tyana by Flavius Philostratus, translated by F. C. Conybeare. Volume 1, Book 2. Chapter 12. And when they came to the Indus, they saw a herd of elephants crossing the river, and they say that they heard this account of the animals. Some of them are marsh elephants, others again mountain elephants, and there is also a third kind which belongs to the plain, and they are captured for use in war. For indeed they go into battle saddled with towers big enough to accommodate 10 or 15 Indians all at once, and from these towers the Indians shoot their bows and hurl their javelins, just as if they were taking aim from gate towers. And the animal itself regards his trunk as a hand, and uses it to hurl weapons. And the Indian elephants are as much bigger than those of Libya, and these are bigger than the horses of Nisa. And other authorities have dwelt on the age of the animals, and say that they are very long-lived. But our party, too, say that they came on an elephant near Taxila, the greatest city in India, who was anointed with myrrh by the natives and adorned with fillets. For, they said, this elephant was one of those who fought on the side of Porus against Alexander, and, as it had made a brave fight, Alexander dedicated it to the sun, and it had, they say, gold rings around its tusks or horns, whichever you call them, and an inscription was on them written in Greek as follows: Alexander the son of Zeus dedicates Ajax to the sun. For he had given this name to the elephant, thinking so great an animal deserved a great name. And the natives reckoned that 350 years had elapsed since this battle, without taking into account how old the elephant was when he went into battle. Chapter 13. And Juba, who was once sovereign of the Libyan race, says that formerly the knights of Libya fought with one another on elephants, and one division of these had a tower engraved upon their tusks, but the others nothing. And when night interrupted the fray, the animals which were so marked had, he says, got the worst of it, and fled into Mount Atlas. But he himself, 400 years afterwards, caught one of the fugitives, and found the captivity of the stamp still fresh on the tusk, and not yet worn away by time. This Juba is of opinion that the tusks are horns, because they grow just where the temples are, and because they need no sharpening of any kind, and remain as they grew, and do not, like teeth, fall out and then grow afresh. But I cannot accept this view, for horns, if not all, at any rate those of stags, do fall out and grow afresh, but the teeth, although in the case of men those which may fall out, will in every case grow again. On the other hand, there is not a single animal whose tusk or dog-tooth falls out naturally, nor in which, when it has fallen out, it will come again. For nature implants these tusks in their jaws for the sake of defense. And, moreover, a circular ridge is formed year by year at the base of the horns, as we see in the case of goats and sheep and oxen. But a tusk grows out quite smooth, and unless something breaks it, it always remains so, for it consists of a material and substance as hard as stone. Moreover, the carrying of horns is confined to animals with cloven hooves, but this animal has 5 nails, and the sole of his foot has many furrows in it, and not being confined by hooves, it seems to stand on a soft, flabby foot. And in the case of all animals that have horns, nature supplies cavernous bones, and causes the horn to grow from outwards, whereas she makes the elephant tusk full and equally massive throughout. And when in the lathe you lay bare the interior, you find a very thin tube piercing the center of it, as in the case with teeth. Now the tusks of the marsh elephants are dark in color, and porous and difficult to work, because they are hollowed out into many cavities, and often knots are formed in them, which oppose difficulties to the craftsman's tool. But the tusks of the mountain kind, though smaller than these, are very white, and there is nothing about them difficult to work. But best of all are the tusks of the elephants of the plain, for these are very large and very white, and so pleasant to turn and carve that the hand can shape them into whatever it likes. If I may also describe the characters of these elephants, those which come from the marshes, and are taken there, are considered to be stupid and idle by the Indians, but those which come from the mountains they regard as wicked and treacherous, and, unless they want something, not to be relied upon by man. But the elephants of the plain are said to be good and tractable, and fond of learning tricks. For they will write and dance, and will sway themselves to and fro, and leap up and down from the ground to the sound of the flute. Chapter 14. And Apollonius saw a herd, I think, of about 30 elephants crossing over the river Indus, and they were following as their leader the smallest among them. But the bigger ones had picked up their young ones by their projecting tusks, where they held them fast by twining their trunks around them. Said Apollonius, "No one, O Damis, has instructed them to do this, but they act of their own instinctive wisdom and cleverness. And you see how, like baggage porters, they have picked up their young, and have them bound fast on, and so carry them along." He said, "I see, Apollonius, how cleverly and with what sagacity they do this. What then is the sense of the silly speculation indulged in by those who idly dispute whether the affection of animals for their young is natural or not, when these very elephants, by their conduct, proclaim that it is so, and that it comes to them by nature? For they have certainly not learnt to do so from men, as they have other things. For these have never yet shared their life of men, and have been endowed by nature with their love of their offspring, and that is why they provide for them and feed their young." Apollonius said, "And you need not, Damis, confine your remarks to elephants, for this animal is only second to man, in my opinion, in understanding and foresight. But I am thinking rather of bears, for they are the fiercest of all animals, and yet they will do anything for their whelps, and also of wolves, among which, although they are so addicted to plunder, yet the female protects its young ones, and the male brings her food in order to save the life of the whelps. And I also equally have in mind the panther, which, from the warmth of its temperament, delights to become a mother, for that is the time when it is determined to rule the male and be mistress of the household, and the male puts up with anything and everything from her, subordinating everything to the welfare of the offspring. And there is also told a story of the lioness, how she will make a lover of the panther and receive him in the lion's lair in the plain, but when she is going to bring forth her young, she flees into the mountains to the haunts of the panthers, for she brings forth young ones that are spotted, and that is why she hides her young and nurses them in winding thickets, pretending that she is spending the day out hunting. For if the lion detected the trick, he would tear the whelps in pieces and claw her offspring as illegitimate. You have read, no doubt, also of one of Homer's lions, and how he made himself look terrible in behalf of his own whelps, and steeled himself to do battle for them. And they say the tigress, although she is the cruelest animal in this country, will approach the ships on the Red Sea to demand back her whelps, and if she gets them back, she goes off mightily delighted. But if the ships sail away, they say that she howls along the sea-coast, and sometimes dies outright. And who does not know the ways of birds? How that the eagles and the cranes will not build their nests until they have fixed in them, the one an eagle stone, and the other a stone of light, to help the hatching out of the eggs and to drive away the snakes. And if we look at creatures in the sea, we need not wonder at the dolphins loving their offspring, for they are superior creatures. But shall we not admire the whales and seals and the viviparous species? For I once saw a seal that was kept shut up at Aige in the circus, and she mourned so deeply for her whelp, which had died after being born in confinement, that she refused food for 3 days together, although she is the most voracious of animals. And the whale takes up its young ones into the cavities of its throat, whenever it is fleeing from a creature bigger than itself. And a viper has been seen licking the serpents which it had borne, and caressing them with her tongue, which she shoots out for the purpose. But we need not entertain, Damis, the silly story that the young of vipers are brought into the world without mothers, for that is a thing which is consistent neither with nature nor with experience. Damis then resumed the conversation by saying, "You will allow me then to praise Euripides for this iambic line which he puts into the mouth of Andromache. And in the case of all men, then, their life lay in their children." Apollonius said, "I admit that that is said cleverly and divinely, but much cleverer and truer would have been the verse if it had included all animals." Damis said, "Then you would like, O Apollonius, to rewrite the line so that we might sing it as follows. And in the case of all animals, then, their life lay in their children. And I agree with you, for it is better so." Chapter 15. But tell me this, did we not, at the beginning of our conversation, declare that the elephants display wisdom and intelligence in what they do? He replied, "Why, certainly, we did say so, Damis, for if intelligence did not govern this animal, neither would it subsist, nor the populations among which it lived." Damis said, "Why then do they conduct their passage over the river in a way so stupid and inconvenient to themselves? For, as you see, the smallest one is leading the way, and he is followed by a slightly larger one. Then comes another still larger than he, and the biggest ones come last of all. But surely they ought to travel in the opposite fashion, and make the biggest ones a wall and rampart in front of themselves." Apollonius replied, "But in the first place they appear to be running away from men who are pursuing them, and whom we shall doubtless come across, as they follow the animals' tracks, and they must and ought to use their best strength to fortify their rear against attack, as is done in war, so that you may regard the elephant as the best tactician to be found among animals. Secondly, as they are crossing a river, if their biggest ones went first, that would not enable the rest of the herd to judge whether the water is shallow enough for all to pass, for the tallest ones would find the passage practicable and easy, but the others would find it dangerous and difficult, because they would not rise above the level of the stream. But the fact that the smallest is able to get across is a sign in itself to the rest that there is no difficulty. And, moreover, if the bigger ones went in first, they would deepen the river for the small ones, for the mud is forced to settle down into ruts and trenches, owing to the heaviness of the animal and the thickness of his feet, whereas the larger ones are in no way prejudiced by the smaller ones crossing in front, because they sink in less deeply. Chapter 16. And I have read in the discourse of Juba that elephants assist one another when they are being hunted, and that they will defend one that is exhausted, and if they can remove him out of danger, they anoint his wounds with the tears of the aloe tree, standing round him like physicians. Many such learned discussions were suggested to them, as one occasion after another worth speaking of arose. Chapter 17. And the statements made by Nearchus and Pythagoras about the river Acesines, to the effect that it debouches to the Indus, and that snakes live in it 70 cubits long, were, they say, fully verified by them. But I will defer what I have to say till I come to speak about dragons, of whose capture Damis gives an account. But when they reached the Indus, and were inclined to pass over the river, they asked the Babylonian whether he knew anything of the river, and questioned him about how to get across it. But he said that he had never navigated it, nor did he know whence they could get a boat onto it. They said, "Why then did you not hire a guide?" He said, "Because I have one who will direct us." And with that he showed them a letter, written to that effect, and this gave them occasion to marvel afresh at the humanity and foresight of Vardennes. For he had addressed the letter in question to the satrap of the Indus, although he was not subject to his dominion, and in it he reminded him of the good service he had done him, but declared that he would not ask any recompense for the same. He said, "For it is not my habit to ask for a return of favors." But he said he would be very grateful if he would give a welcome to Apollonius, and send him on wherever he wished to go. And he had given gold to the guide, so that, in case he found Apollonius in want thereof, he might give it to him and save him from looking to the generosity of anyone else. And when the Indian received the letter, he declared that he was highly honored, and would interest himself in the sage as much as if the king of India had written in his behalf, and he lent his official boat for him to embark in, and other vessels on which the camels were ferried across, and he also sent a guide to the whole of the country, which is bordered by the Hydraotes, and he wrote to his own king, begging him not to treat with less respect than Vardennes, a man who was a Greek and divine. Chapter 18. Thus they crossed the Indus at the point where it was nearly 40 stades broad, for such is the size of its navigable portion. And they write the following account of this river. They say that the Indus arises in the Caucasus, and is bigger at its source than any of the other rivers of Asia. And as it advances, it absorbs into itself several navigable rivers, and, like the Nile, it floods the land of India and brings down soil over it, and so provides the Indians with land to sow in the manner of the Egyptians. Now it is said that there is snow on the hills in Ethiopia and in the land of the Cappadocia, and I do not choose to contradict, out of respect for the authorities. Nevertheless, I cannot agree with them, when I consider how the river Indus effects the same results as the Nile, without any snow falling on the country that rises behind and above it. And moreover, I know that God has set the Ethiopian and the Indian at the two extremes or horns of the entire earth, making black the latter who dwell where the sun rises no less than the former who dwell where it sets. Now how should this be the case of the inhabitants, unless they enjoyed summer heat during the winter? But where the sun warms the earth all through the year, how can one suppose that it ever snows? And how could it ever snow there so hard as to supply the rivers there with water, and make them rise above their normal levels? But even if there were frequent snowfalls in regions so exposed to the sun, how could the melted snow ever cover such an expanse as to resemble a sea? And how could it ever supply a river which deluges the whole of Egypt? Chapter 19. And as they were being conveyed across the Indus, they say that they came across many river horses and many crocodiles, just as those do who sail along the Nile. And they say that the vegetation on the Indus resembles that which grows along the Nile, and that the climate of India is sunny in winter, but suffocating in summer. But to counteract this, Providence has excellently contrived that it should often rain in their country. And they also say that they learned from the Indians that the king was in the habit of coming to this river when it rose in the appropriate seasons, and would sacrifice to the river bulls and black horses. For white is less esteemed by the Indians than black, because, I imagine, the latter is their own color. And when he has sacrificed, they say that he plunges into the river a measure of gold made to resemble that which is used in measuring wheat. And why the king does this, the Indians, they say, have no idea. But they themselves conjectured that this measure was sunk in the river, either to secure the plentiful harvest, whose yield the farmers use such a measure to gauge, or to keep the river within its proper bounds, and prevent it from rising to such heights as that it would drown the land. Chapter 20. And after they had crossed the river, They were conducted by the satrap's guide direct to Taxila, where the Indian had his royal palace. And they say that on this side of the Indus the dress of the people consists of native linen, with shoes of biblus and a hat when it rains, but that the upper classes there are apparelled in bezus, and that the bezus grows upon a tree of which the stem resembles that of the white poplar, and the leaves those of the willow. And Apollonius says that he was delighted with the byssus, because it resembled his sable philosopher's cloak. And the byssus is imported into Egypt from India for many sacred uses. Taxila, they tell us, is about as big as Nineveh, and was fortified fairly well after the manner of Greek cities. And here was the royal residence of the personage who then ruled the empire of Porus. And they saw a temple, they say, in front of the wall, which was not far short of 100 feet in size, made of porphyry, and there was constructed within it a shrine, somewhat small as compared with the great size of the temple, which is also surrounded with columns, and deserving of notice. For bronze tablets were nailed into each of its walls, on which were engraved the exploits of Porus and Alexander. But the pattern was wrought with orichalcus, and silver, and gold, and black bronze. And you saw elephants, horses, soldiers, helmets, shields, and spears, and javelins and swords, all made of iron. And if we are to believe report, in a respectable style of art resembling that of Zeuxis or Polygnotus or Euphranor, who delighted in light and shade, and infused life into their designs, as well as a sense of depth and relief. And the metals were blended in the design, melted in like so many colors, and the character of the picture was also pleasing in itself, for Porus dedicated these designs after the death of the Macedonian, who was depicted in them in the hour of victory, reinstating Porus, who was wounded, and presenting him with India, which was now his gift. And it is said that Porus was grieved at the death of Alexander, and that he lamented him as a generous and good prince, and as long as Alexander was alive after his departure from India, he never used the royal diction and style, although he had license to do so, nor issued kingly edicts to the Indians, but figured himself as a satrap full of moderation, and guided in every action by the wish to please Alexander. Chapter 21. My argument does not allow me to pass over the accounts written of this Porus. For when the Macedonian was about to cross the river, and some of Porus's advisers wished him to make an alliance with the kings on the other side of the Hyphasis and of the Ganges, urging that the invader would never face a general coalition against him of the whole of India, he replied, "If the temper of my subjects is such that I cannot save myself without allies, then for me it is better not to be king." And when someone announced to him that Alexander had captured Darius, he remarked, "A king, but not a man." And when the mule driver had caparisoned the elephant, on which he meant to fight, he said, "He, O king, will carry you." He replied, "Nay, I shall carry him, if I prove myself the same man I used to be." And when they counseled him to sacrifice to the river, and induce it to reject the rafts of the Macedonians, and make itself impassable to Alexander, he said, "It ill befits those who have arms to resort to imprecation." And after the battle, in which his conduct struck Alexander as divine and superhuman, when one of his relations said to him, "If you had only paid homage to him after he had crossed, O Porus, you would not yourself have been defeated in battle, nor would so many Indians have lost their lives, nor would you yourself have been wounded." He said, "I knew from report that Alexander was so fond of glory that, if I did homage to him, he would regard me as a slave, but I fought him as a king. And I much preferred his admiration to his pity, nor was I wrong in my calculation. For by showing myself to be such a man as Alexander found me, I both lost and won everything in one day." Such is the character which the historians give of this Indian, and they say that he was the handsomest of his race. and in stature taller than any man since the Trojan heroes, but that he was quite young when he went to war with Alexander. End of Volume 1, Book 2, Chapters 12 through 21.